You're about to make a mistake you can't undo, the woman said quietly, her voice steady in the cool night air, and for a split second, the street seemed to hold its breath as if it understood something the officer did not. 10 minutes earlier, the city had been just another late evening in early fall, the kind where the pavement still held the warmth of the day and the streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long amber reflections across parked cars and rain-damp sidewalks. And Angela Brooks walked alone beneath that soft glow, her steps measured, her shoulders relaxed, a worn leather folder tucked under her arm, the faint rustle of paper inside it the only sound she carried with her besides the quiet rhythm of her breathing. She wore no uniform, no visible badge, just a dark coat that brushed against her knees and sensible shoes that echoed lightly against the concrete, each step deliberate, each movement composed. Like someone used to being watched even when no one was looking. A passing car slowed at the corner, headlights sweeping across her face for a brief moment, illuminating calm eyes that didn't dart or flinch, eyes that had seen enough to recognize tension before it fully formed, and as the light faded, the world settled back into that muted hum of distant traffic and whispering wind. Somewhere down the block, a door slammed, sharp and sudden, and then came the low crackle of a police radio. Distorted voices spilling into the night like static. Warnings, followed by the unmistakable sound of boots approaching, heavy, confident, carrying authority in every step. Officer Daniel Carter emerged from the shadows near a patrol car idling at the curb, its red and blue lights dark but present, like a silent promise of control, his posture rigid, his jaw set, his hand resting near his belt as if the position itself demanded tension. And when his eyes landed on Angela, something shifted, not curiosity, not concern, but assumption. "Hey," he called out, his voice cutting clean through the quiet, and a single word lingered in the space between them, heavier than it should have been. Angela slowed, then stopped, turning her head just enough to acknowledge him without fully facing him, her grip tightening slightly around the folder, not out of fear but out of instinct, the kind that came from years of reading situations before they unfolded. Carter took a few steps closer, the faint crunch of gravel under his boots marking the distance closing between them, his presence expanding into the space like it belonged there. Like he had already decided the outcome of whatever this moment would become. The air cooled further, a light breeze threading through the narrow street, lifting the edge of Angela's coat and carrying with it the distant wail of a siren miles away, a reminder that somewhere else, something urgent was happening, something real, yet here, in this small pocket of stillness, the tension felt just as sharp, just as immediate. Angela turned fully now, her face calm, unreadable, her posture upright but not defensive, and for a brief second the two stood there. One holding authority like a weapon, the other holding silence like armor, and it was in that silence that the imbalance revealed itself, not in words, not in actions, but in the quiet certainty that one of them believed he already knew exactly who the other was, and the other knew he was wrong. Carter's radio crackled again, a voice calling out codes that faded into static. But he didn't look away from her, didn't break the moment. Because something about her stillness unsettled him in a way he couldn't name, like a mirror reflecting something he wasn't prepared to see, and yet he stepped closer anyway, closing the last few feet between them, bringing the weight of his uniform, his badge, his assumptions into her space, unaware that every second that passed was building towards something irreversible, something that would turn this quiet street, this ordinary night, into a moment neither of them would ever forget. And Angela, without raising her voice, without moving an inch, repeated softly, "You're about to make a decision you can't undo." Her words barely louder than the wind, but somehow heavier than the authority standing in front of her, and for the first time, the night didn't feel quiet anymore, it felt like it was waiting. Carter's eyes narrowed slightly, not in confusion but in irritation, like her calm tone had disrupted something he relied on, and he shifted his weight forward, boots scraping softly against the pavement as he closed the remaining distance between them, the faint scent of engine oil and cold air trailing behind him from the idling patrol car, its low hum vibrating through the stillness. Angela did not step back, did not adjust her posture. She simply stood there with that same composed stillness, the folder still tucked beneath her arm, her fingers resting lightly along its edge as if grounding herself in something steady and real, while the moment stretched tighter. "I need to see some identification," Carter said, his voice firm, measured, carrying the practiced authority of someone who expected immediate compliance, and the words hung in the air between them, heavier now, layered with implication, assumption, and something unspoken that did not need to be said aloud. Angela's gaze did not waver. Her eyes steady on his, not challenging, not submissive, simply present, and she took a slow breath before answering, her voice even, controlled. "Officer, I am on my way home." And there was no rush in her words, no defensiveness, just clarity, as if she were stating a fact that should have been enough. Carter's jaw tightened, the muscle along his cheek shifting as he exhaled through his nose, a subtle sign of impatience building beneath the surface, and he took another step forward, narrowing the space between them until the tension felt almost physical, like pressure in the air before a storm. Somewhere behind them, a car passed slowly, tires gliding over damp asphalt, the driver's head turning just slightly as they moved by, sensing the moment but not stopping, not intervening, just another witness carried along by the night. Angela adjusted her grip on the folder, not pulling it closer, not hiding it, just settling it more securely against her side, and for a brief moment, the edge of something metallic inside caught the streetlight, a quick glint that disappeared as quickly as it came, unnoticed by Carter, whose attention remained fixed on her face, searching, judging, deciding. "I asked for identification," he repeated, his tone sharper now, the patience thinning, and the words landed harder this time, not louder, but heavier, like a line being drawn that he expected her to cross without question. Angela's expression did not change, but there was a shift, subtle and internal, like a decision settling into place, and she tilted her head just slightly, her eyes softening in a way that did not signal fear but something closer to resolve. As if she had seen this moment before, in different forms, with different faces, and knew exactly where it could lead. The wind picked up again, brushing past them, carrying a loose sheet of paper from somewhere down the block that skittered across the street before catching against the curb, a small, restless movement in an otherwise frozen scene. Carter extended his hand now, palm open but expectant, waiting, the gesture simple yet loaded with authority. And the seconds stretched as Angela looked at that hand, then back at his face, her silence not defiance, not hesitation, but something deliberate, something chosen. In the distance, a radio call echoed faintly from another unit, a dispatcher's voice cutting through static with clipped urgency. But it faded quickly, leaving them once again in that suspended pocket of quiet where every breath, every shift of weight, every flicker of light felt amplified. Angela finally moved. Slow and controlled, her hands slipping into the inside pocket of her coat, not rushed, not cautious, just precise, and for a brief second, Carter's posture tightened, his shoulders lifting almost imperceptibly as his focus sharpened, his training filling in gaps his assumptions had already written, and yet there was no sudden motion, no escalation, just that same measured pace as she withdrew a small, worn card holder, holding it loosely between her fingers without extending it yet. Her eyes lifted to meet his again, steady as ever, and in that moment, something about the way she held herself, the quiet certainty in her posture, the absence of fear or urgency, created a crack in the narrative Carter had built in his mind, a flicker of doubt he did not want to acknowledge. And still, he stood there, waiting, expecting, unaware that every second that passed was bringing him closer to a realization that would not just challenge his authority, but redefine it entirely. The small card holder rested between Angela's fingers, unmoving, as if the decision to reveal what was inside carried more weight than the object itself, and Carter's eyes locked onto it with sharpened focus, his stance tightening, shoulders squared, his hands still extended but now more rigid, less patient, like the moment had shifted from routine to something that required control. The faint hum of the patrol car behind him continued to fill the silence, its engine idling steadily, a low vibration that seemed to underline every second that passed, while the streetlight above flickered once, briefly dimming before returning to its steady glow, casting long shadows that stretched across the pavement and wrapped around their feet. Angela did not rush, did not react to his impatience, she simply held the card holder at chest level, her thumb resting along its edge, her breathing slow and even, as if she were measuring not time, but consequence, and when she finally spoke, her voice was calm, almost reflective. "Before I hand this to you, I want you to think about what happens next." And the words did not challenge him, they did not accuse, they simply existed, quiet and deliberate, like a line placed gently but firmly in the ground. Carter's expression hardened, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face as he exhaled sharply, the sound cutting through the quiet like a warning. "You are not in a position to tell me what to think," he replied, his tone controlled but edged with something sharper beneath. And yet, despite the firmness in his voice, there was a subtle shift in his posture, a hesitation so slight it could have been missed, as if some part of him registered the difference between defiance and certainty and did not quite know how to process it. A gust of wind moved through the narrow street again, lifting a strand of Angela's hair and brushing it lightly across her cheek, but she did not move to adjust it, her focus remaining steady, her gaze fixed on Carter. With a quiet intensity that did not rise to confrontation, but did not retreat either, in the distance, a faint metallic clang echoed from somewhere down the block, followed by the low murmur of voices, life continuing just out of reach of this suspended moment, unaware of the tension coiled tightly within it. Carter lowered his hand slightly, not fully, just enough to signal a shift from expectation to demand. And his voice dropped a fraction, more deliberate now. "Identification," he repeated, each syllable slower, heavier, as if reinforcing the authority he felt beginning to slip, and the word lingered between them, pressing into the silence. Angela's eyes softened again, not with fear, not with submission, but with something closer to recognition, as if she had seen this exact moment play out in different forms across different streets, with different names and different faces. And she understood where it could lead if left unchecked. She finally moved, opening the card holder with a small, precise motion, the soft click of its hinge barely audible, and for a brief second, the inside caught the light, a glimpse of something official, something structured, something that did not belong to the assumptions that had been placed on her just moments before. But she did not extend it yet, she held it there, visible enough to exist, hidden enough to require acknowledgement. Carter's eyes flickered, just for a moment. A brief break in the certainty that had defined his stance, and his gaze dropped to the card, then lifted back to her face, searching, recalibrating, but not yet accepting, because to accept would mean to reconsider everything that had already been set in motion. The radio at his shoulder crackled suddenly, louder this time, a dispatcher's voice cutting through with urgency, words indistinct but tone unmistakable, and for a split second, his attention wavered, pulled between the call and the moment in front of him, but he did not respond, did not reach for it, because something about this interaction had rooted him in place, demanding resolution. Angela closed the card holder halfway, not fully, just enough to remind him that the moment was still hers to control, and she spoke again, softer now, but no less steady. "You still have time to choose how this ends." And there was no threat in her voice, no warning meant to intimidate, only a quiet truth that settled into the space between them, and for the first time since he had stepped out of that patrol car, Carter felt it, not as fear, not as doubt, but as pressure, the kind that builds slowly, invisibly, until it reshapes everything it touches. And yet he stood there, holding on to authority, like a fixed point, unaware that it was already beginning to shift beneath his feet. Carter's fingers curled slightly at his side, the tension in his hand no longer hidden, and the space between them felt narrower now, charged with something that neither of them named but both could feel settling into place, heavy and irreversible. The radio on his shoulder crackled again, sharper this time, the dispatcher's voice cutting through with clipped urgency. "Unit 12 confirmed status." But he did not answer, his focus locked on Angela as if stepping away from this moment would mean losing control of it entirely, and control was something he had never been willing to surrender. Angela remained still, the card holder half open in her hand, the faint edge of the identification inside catching the streetlight again, a quiet glimmer that did not demand attention but refused to disappear, and her posture did not shift, not even slightly, as if the ground beneath her feet was something solid and known, while everything around them began to feel uncertain. "You are delaying a lawful request," Carter said, his voice lower now, more deliberate, each word placed carefully as though reinforcing a structure he felt beginning to crack, and yet there was a subtle change in his tone, less force, more insistence, as if he were trying to convince not just her, but himself. Angela's eyes held his, steady and unwavering, and she took a slow breath before responding, her voice calm, measured. "No, officer, I am giving you space to make the right one." And the sentence settled into the air with a quiet weight that lingered longer than it should have, stretching the silence that followed into something almost tangible. A car turned the corner at the far end of the block, its headlights sweeping across them for a brief second, illuminating Carter's face, the tightness in his jaw, the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes that disappeared as quickly as the light itself, leaving only the rigid mask he had learned to hold. He stepped closer again, closing the last bit of distance until only a few feet separated them. And the authority he carried seemed louder now, pressing into the space. Like a force he expected to be obeyed. "Hand it over," he said, and this time there was no repetition, no elaboration, just the command, simple and final. Angela looked at him for a long moment, not defiant, not afraid, just present, as if memorizing the exact version of him that stood in front of her, the posture, the tone, the certainty, and then, slowly, she extended her hand, offering the card holder forward, the movement controlled and precise. Like the closing of a chapter that had not yet been read, Carter reached for it, his fingers brushing against the edge as he took it from her, and for a brief second, their hands were close enough for him to feel the steadiness in hers, a stillness that did not match the narrative he had built, and it lingered in his mind even as he pulled the holder back toward himself. He flipped it open fully now, the hinge giving a soft click, and his eyes dropped to the identification inside. Scanning quickly at first, then slowing, the rhythm of his gaze changing as something there did not align with what he expected to see, and the street seemed to quiet even further, as if the city itself leaned in, waiting for recognition to catch up with reality. The dispatcher's voice came through again, louder, more insistent. "Unit 12, respond." But Carter did not move, did not speak, his attention locked onto the small card in his hand, the edges of his certainty beginning to blur, not yet shattered, but no longer solid, and Angela stood there silent, watching not with triumph, not with satisfaction, but with the quiet patience of someone who understood that the truth did not need to be forced, only seen, and in that suspended second, everything that had been assumed began to shift, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a quiet inevitability that could not be undone. Carter's eyes moved across the identification once more, slower this time, as if each word carried a weight he had not anticipated, and the confidence that had once defined his posture began to loosen in subtle ways, the rigid set of his shoulders easing just enough to reveal the shift happening beneath the surface. The streetlight above flickered again, casting a brief shadow across his face, and in that moment, the sharp certainty in his expression softened into something less defined. Something searching, as if the ground he stood on was no longer as stable as it had been seconds ago. The radio on his shoulder crackled once more, louder now, the dispatcher's voice cutting through with urgency. "Unit 12, we need your response." But Carter did not answer, his attention fixed on the card in his hand, the edges of reality pressing against the assumptions he had built, forcing them to bend. Angela remained exactly where she stood, her hands now relaxed at her sides, the absence of tension in her posture more powerful than any resistance could have been, and her gaze did not leave him, not to challenge, not to pressure, but to witness, to allow the moment to unfold without interference. A faint sound of footsteps echoed from the far end of the block, someone approaching but still distant, their presence barely more than a suggestion in the quiet night. Yet it added to the sense that this moment was no longer isolated, that it was expanding beyond the two of them. Carter swallowed, a small, almost imperceptible motion, and his grip on the card shifted, his fingers adjusting as if the object itself had become heavier, more significant, and he read the name again, then the title beneath it, the words aligning in a way that could no longer be dismissed, no longer be explained away. The air seemed to still completely, the low hum of the patrol car fading into the background, the distant city noise dimming until all that remained was the quiet space between recognition and response. His breathing changed, not faster, but deeper, as if he were trying to steady something inside himself that had begun to unravel, and for the first time, his gaze did not return immediately to Angela. It lingered on the card, held there by the undeniable truth it carried. The dispatcher's voice came through again, sharper now, almost cutting. Unit 12, identify your status immediately. And this time, Carter's hand twitched toward the radio, then stopped, suspended mid-motion, as if answering that call would force him to acknowledge something he was not yet ready to say aloud. Angela's voice broke the silence, soft but clear. You see it now, she said, not as a question, not as an accusation, but as a simple acknowledgement, and the words settled into the space between them with a quiet finality. Carter lifted his eyes slowly, meeting hers again, and the difference was there, unmistakable, not in volume, not in posture, but in the absence of certainty, the absence of that unwavering belief that had guided him just moments before. A car slowed at the corner, its headlights pausing on them for a second longer than necessary, the driver sensing something in the stillness, something unresolved, before continuing on, leaving them once again in that suspended pocket of time. Carter's lips parted slightly, as if to speak, but no words came, and the silence that followed was heavier than anything that had been said, filled with the weight of realization, of consequence, of something irreversible settling into place. Angela did not move, did not step forward, did not reclaim the card. She simply stood there, allowing him the space to process what could not be undone, her presence steady, grounded, unchanged, and in that stillness, the balance between them shifted completely, not through force, not through confrontation, but through truth, quiet and undeniable, and as the seconds stretched, it became clear that whatever came next would not be defined by authority, but by how he chose to respond to the reality now placed in his hands. The silence stretched longer than either of them expected, not empty but full, like the air itself had thickened, holding every unspoken thought in place, and Carter's hand remained suspended between them, the identification still open, the weight of it no longer just physical but something deeper, something that pressed into his chest with quiet insistence. The street light above steadied, its soft amber glow settling over the scene, outlining the edges of his uniform, the crease of his sleeve, the faint tremor in his fingers that he could not fully control, and for the first time that night, he became aware of his own breathing, slow but uneven, as if his body had begun to register what his mind was still trying to catch up to. Angela did not speak, did not move, her presence grounded and calm, the kind of stillness that did not demand attention but held it anyway, and her eyes remained on him, not searching, not judging, simply there, allowing the moment to unfold without interference, without pressure. Somewhere in the distance, a car door closed with a dull thud, followed by the faint echo of footsteps fading away, life continuing just beyond the edges of this moment, indifferent to the shift taking place here, and yet the quiet felt deeper now, more deliberate, as if the city itself had stepped back to give this realization room to breathe. Carter lowered the cards slowly, not fully, just enough to break the direct line between his eyes and the words that had already changed everything, and his gaze drifted past Angela for a brief second, unfocused, as if he were trying to place himself back into a version of the moment that no longer existed. The radio on his shoulder crackled again, the dispatcher's voice sharper now, more urgent, calling for confirmation, calling for presence. But he did not respond, the sound registering somewhere distant, secondary to the quiet shift happening inside him. His grip loosened slightly, the tension in his hand easing as the rigid structure of certainty gave way to something more fragile, something uncertain, and when he finally spoke, his voice was different, not louder, not softer, but altered in a way that carried hesitation where there had once been command. I did not, he began, then stopped, the sentence falling apart before it could take shape, because whatever he had intended to say no longer fit the reality in front of him. Angela's expression did not change, but there was a subtle softening around her eyes, not sympathy, not forgiveness, but recognition, as if she understood the moment he was standing in, the space between who he believed himself to be and what his actions had revealed. The wind moved through again, lighter this time, brushing past them, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and distant asphalt. A quiet reminder of the world continuing beyond this intersection. Beyond this pause, Carter looked down at the card once more, not searching now, not questioning, just seeing, and the title beneath her name no longer felt like information, it felt like consequence, like something that had always been there, waiting to be acknowledged. His shoulders lowered slightly, the rigid posture softening as the realization settled deeper, and for the first time, the authority he carried did not feel like something external, something enforced, but something internal. Something that required accountability, and the weight of that understanding pressed into him with quiet clarity. Angela took a small breath, almost imperceptible, and shifted her weight just slightly, not stepping away, not stepping closer, simply adjusting within the space she already occupied, and in that small movement, there was a sense of balance restored, not through force, not through confrontation, but through truth being allowed to exist. The radio crackled once more, insistent now. And Carter's hand finally moved, slowly reaching toward it. But even as his fingers brushed against the device, his eyes lifted again to meet hers, and in that look, something had changed completely, something that could not be undone, and the silence that followed was no longer tension, no longer uncertainty, but something quieter, heavier, the sound of a moment turning into consequence. Carter's thumb pressed against the button on his radio, but he did not speak right away, the device hovering near his shoulder as if even that simple action required a decision he had not yet fully made, and when his voice finally came through, it was controlled but different, stripped of the sharp certainty it once carried. Unit 12, status confirmed. He said, the words brief, measured, giving nothing away, yet everything in his tone had already shifted. The dispatcher responded immediately, her voice crisp, cutting through the static. Chief en route to your location, stand by. And the moment those words landed, the air between them changed again, not abruptly, but with a quiet finality that settled into Carter's posture like weight he could no longer ignore. His eyes moved back to Angela. Slower now, more deliberate, as if seeing her for the first time without the filter of assumption, and the card in his hand no longer felt like something to verify, but something that had already spoken louder than anything he could say. A distant engine grew louder, the low hum of another vehicle approaching, its headlights beginning to turn the corner at the far end of the block, casting long beams that stretched across the pavement, and slowly pulled the scene out of shadow and into clarity. Carter exhaled, a long, controlled breath that seemed to release something held tight inside his chest, and his shoulders lowered just enough to show the shift, the quiet collapse of a stance built on certainty that no longer held. Angela stood exactly where she had been, unmoved, her hands relaxed at her sides, her presence steady and unchanging, and there was no urgency in her expression, no need to assert what was already known. Because the truth had reached him without force, without resistance, simply by existing. The approaching vehicle slowed, tires rolling over damp asphalt with a soft, deliberate sound, and the glow of its headlights intensified, illuminating the edges of Carter's uniform, the faint lines of tension still lingering in his face, and the card he held, now fully visible in the light, no longer shadowed, no longer ambiguous. He looked down at it once more, not to confirm, not to question, but to accept, and when he lifted his gaze again, the distance between who he had been in that first moment and who he was now felt undeniable, a shift not marked by words, but by the absence of the certainty that had once defined him. The vehicle came to a stop several yards away, its engine idling softly, and for a brief second, no one stepped out, the pause stretching just long enough to underline the weight of everything that had already happened before any authority could intervene. Carter moved then, slow and deliberate, his hand lowering the identification as he stepped back half a pace, creating space where before he had closed it, and the gesture was small, almost unnoticeable. But it carried more meaning than any command he had given earlier, a quiet acknowledgement of the balance that had shifted completely. Angela's eyes followed the movement, not with surprise, not with triumph, but with the same calm presence she had held from the beginning, as if this outcome had never been in question, only the path to it. The driver's door of the approaching vehicle opened with a soft click, and footsteps followed, measured and confident, moving toward them. But before the figure could fully step into view, Carter spoke again, his voice lower now. steadier, but stripped of its earlier edge. "I understand," he said, the words simple, but carrying the weight of everything that had changed in the past few minutes, and in that quiet admission, the moment reached its turning point, not marked by force, not marked by authority, but by recognition, and the night, which had once felt tense and uncertain, settled into a different kind of stillness, one shaped not by control, but by truth finally seen. The footsteps from the approaching figure came to a stop just short of them, precise and measured, the sound of polished shoes against damp pavement carrying a quiet authority that did not need to announce itself, and Carter turned slightly, not fully, just enough to acknowledge the presence without breaking the fragile shift that had already taken place, while Angela remained facing forward, her posture unchanged, her gaze steady. As if she had been expecting this exact moment all along, the headlights from the vehicle behind cast a soft halo around the scene, outlining the figure now stepping into clearer view, a uniform pressed sharp, posture upright, the subtle glint of rank catching the light. But before any formal words were exchanged, Carter moved first, his hand lowering completely as he closed the card holder and extended it back toward Angela, the gesture slow, deliberate, and without the edge it once carried, his fingers releasing it with a care that spoke louder than any apology. Angela accepted it without hesitation, her hand steady as it had always been, and she slipped it back into her coat with a small, controlled motion. The soft rustle of fabric barely audible but final in its meaning, as if closing a chapter that had already resolved itself. The figure beside them paused, observing, saying nothing, allowing the moment to complete on its own terms, and Carter's shoulders lowered another fraction, the last remnants of rigid authority giving way to something quieter, something grounded in recognition rather than control. He took a step back, then another, creating space not out of command but out of acknowledgement. His eyes lifting to meet Angela's once more, and this time there was no challenge in them. No assumption, only the weight of understanding settling into place. "I should have listened," he said, the words steady but carrying a depth that had not been there before, not an excuse, not a defense, simply a statement that existed on its own, and the night seemed to absorb it, holding it in the same quiet stillness that had defined everything since the moment began. Angela did not respond immediately, her gaze remaining on him for a long second, not searching for more, not demanding anything further, just allowing the words to stand as they were, and when she finally spoke, her voice was calm, even. "What matters is what you do after you realize." And there was no judgment in her tone, no softness meant to comfort, only a clear line drawn forward, beyond the moment, into what would come next. The figure beside them shifted slightly, a subtle movement that signaled awareness without interruption, and Carter nodded once, a small, controlled motion that carried more weight than any formal acknowledgement, as if accepting not just her words, but the responsibility they implied. The wind moved through the street again, lighter now, carrying away the tension that had once filled the space, leaving behind something quieter, something resolved, and the distant sounds of the city began to return, faint at first, then gradually more present, as if the world had been waiting for this moment to pass before continuing. Carter's hand dropped to his side, no longer tense, no longer held in readiness, and he stepped back one final time, creating a clear path where there had once been obstruction. His posture no longer imposing but open, reflective, and as Angela shifted her weight and took a step forward, moving past him without hesitation, without pause, the balance of the moment completed itself, not through force, not through command, but through a quiet, undeniable change that had already taken root. The figure who had approached remained silent, watching as Angela moved forward into the soft glow of the streetlight, her presence steady, unchanged, while behind her, Carter stood still, not frozen, not uncertain, but grounded in a realization that would follow him long after the night had ended, and in that stillness, the meaning of the moment settled fully into place, not loud, not dramatic, but lasting. Angela's footsteps moved steadily along the sidewalk, each one quiet but certain, the soft rhythm of her shoes against the pavement blending back into the natural pulse of the city, and as she passed beneath the next streetlight, the amber glow caught the edge of her coat and the calm line of her face, illuminating a presence that had not changed from the moment this began, only revealed. Behind her, Carter remained where he stood. The space she left behind no longer filled with tension but with something heavier, something reflective, and his eyes followed her for a brief moment before lowering, not out of avoidance, but out of recognition, as if he understood that the moment no longer belonged to him to hold. The figure who had stepped from the vehicle turned slightly, watching Angela walk away, then glanced at Carter, not with urgency, not with reprimand, but with a measured awareness that required no words. And the silence between them carried more meaning than any formal exchange could have. The patrol car's engine continued its low hum. Steady and unchanged, a quiet reminder of routine, of structure, yet the man standing beside it was no longer operating from the same place he had been minutes earlier, and the difference showed not in any dramatic gesture, but in the way his shoulders settled, the way his stance softened, the way his gaze no longer searched for control but accepted the absence of it. A distant siren echoed faintly across the city, rising and falling before fading into the night, and with it came the gradual return of everything that had paused, the movement of cars, the murmur of voices, the subtle life of a street that no longer held its breath. Angela reached the corner and slowed slightly, not to look back, not to confirm anything behind her, but simply to adjust her pace as she approached the crosswalk, her hand briefly brushing the inside of her coat where the card holder rested, a small, almost instinctive motion that carried no tension. Only continuity. The light above the intersection shifted from red to green, the soft click of the signal marking the transition, and she stepped forward, crossing with the same calm certainty she had carried from the beginning, her figure moving through the glow of passing headlights before settling again into shadow on the other side. Carter watched the light change, watched the space where she had been, and then exhaled slowly, a breath that seemed to release more than just the moment. And when he finally turned toward his vehicle, his movements were deliberate, grounded, no longer driven by assumption but shaped by something quieter, something more aware. The figure beside him spoke at last, a low, measured tone that did not demand explanation, only acknowledgement, and Carter nodded once, the motion small but complete, as if accepting not just the question that had not been asked, but the answer he would carry forward. The wind moved gently through the street again, lifting a loose piece of paper from the curb and carrying it a few feet before letting it settle, a simple, ordinary motion that felt almost symbolic in its quiet release, and the night, which had once been tense and suspended, now breathed freely, the weight of what had happened settling not as noise, but as something still and lasting. Across the street, Angela disappeared into the flow of the city, her presence blending into the movement of people and light, yet leaving behind a shift that could not be undone. And in the space she left, there was no need for final words, no need for resolution spoken aloud, because the silence itself carried it, clear and undeniable. The kind of silence that does not empty a moment, but completes it.